Good evening and welcome to RwandaTV News in English this 11th day of April, when we remember more than 2,000 Tutsi who were killed at Eto after being abandoned by the UN peacekeeping force then. William Evans is my name, but first the headlines. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ambassador Olivier Nduhungirehe, has warned against ongoing genocide ideology and hate speech in the region while remembering the more than 2,000 Tutsi who were killed at Eto in Nyanza, Chichuchiro. While survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Gashora sector of Jesera district have commended the government of Rwanda for its continued support, which they say has helped them rebuild their lives. Pleasure is having you join me for RwandaTV News in English. Now this is the news in detail. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ambassador Olivier Nduhungirehe, has warned against ongoing genocide ideology and hate speech in the region while remembering the more than 2,000 Tutsi who were killed at Eto in Nyanza in Chichuchiro district. We do have details. What is now remembered as a walk of remembrance was in April 1994, a journey to death. The route from former Eto Chichuchiro, now IPRC Kigali, to Nyanza is where thousands of Tutsi who had sought refuge were forced to march before being killed. Among those sheltering at Eto were educated individuals, women and staff members of the United Nations, along with their families. Survivors recall how UN peacekeepers, largely belligerent troops, withdrew from the site, leaving those they were meant to protect at the mercy of Interahamwe militia who had surrounded the compound. The refugees were then taken to Nyanza, where many were killed.
Ingabo ziza kugenda za minwari zimaze kugenda abantu bakwirwa imishwaro.
The meanwhile troops left, leaving everyone stranded. In the meanwhile, the Interahamwe militia were watching closely, waiting for them to leave so they can begin killing people. Shortly after the troops had left, people moved out confused and frightened, and the militias started killing them. From Eto to Sonatib via Sahara, it was raining, but the Interahamwe militias kept killing and stealing from people. When we arrived at Sonatib, the soldiers made us sit down and they engaged in a brief meeting. They discussed and one of them suggested that they take us to Nyabarongo. I heard him because I wasn't far from them. To that, another responded that no, rubbish must be put together with other litter. There was a dumping ground here in Nyanza before the genocide. In response, the colleague agreed to the idea without hesitation. The president of Ibuka condemned the persistence of genocide ideology, particularly among the youth. He called on diplomats accredited to Rwanda to carry the message of remembrance beyond the country's borders, stressing that it concerns all humanity.
Turamagana buri wese ukirangwa n'ingengabitekerezo ya jenoside.
We rebuke everyone that is still obsessed with the genocide ideology and demand that anyone found guilty of this be punished as provided by the law wherever they may be in the world. We beseech especially the youth to say no to divisionism and to have the courage of learning the history of our country instead of following propaganda spread on social media. This walk to remember attracts different people, including foreign dignitaries, and we thank them for their solidarity. We ask them to share across the world the message we share here, including delayed justice, genocide ideology, and others, because it is not exclusively just about Rwandans, but rather about humanity.
Bireba uwitwa umuntu wese aho ava akagera.
Foreign Affairs Minister Ambassador Olivier Nduhungirehe described the actions of the international community as more than just abandonment, saying the failure of peacekeepers at Eto should not be understated.
Umusirikare wese w'umwuga ubona iyo situation.
Any professional soldier who sees such a situation, and after they abandon civilians in the hands of armed militias with pangas and other traditional weapons, it is beyond just abandoning civilians or the Tutsi. Rather, it is delivering them into the hands of the killers. That is how it happened, and we must speak about it without pretense. In a country called Rwanda, the air was filled with screaming, and the genocide was happening. UN peacekeepers deployed to fight against such atrocities, but for some reason, members of the UN Security Council found it right to withdraw even the few peacekeepers who were deployed here, yielding to pressure from Belgium. The minister added that beyond the events of 1994, some countries have failed to bring genocide suspects to justice, while others continue to tolerate or support narratives and groups hostile to Rwanda.
Zirenga 1,100 twohereje mu mahanga, inyinshi ni muri Afrika. Ariko ibihugu byatanze ubutabera byaburanishije.
Countries that delivered justice through prosecution, or those who sent genocide suspects back to Rwanda, are very countable. Some African states have betrayed us on this matter, and we want to re-encourage them to serve justice and do something about this issue. Another issue that I do not want to overemphasize concerns the crisis in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We signed an agreement in which we sought the Congolese government to neutralize FDLR, but they've not done so until now. Instead, they're now equipping them the more. Of the nearly 4,000 Tutsis who had sought refuge at Eto and were taken to Nyanza on April 11, 1994, fewer than 100 survived after the arrival of the RPF forces, which put an end to the killings.
Now, survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Gashora sector of Bugesera district have commended the government of Rwanda for its continued support, which they say has helped them rebuild their lives and move forward. They were speaking during the 32nd commemoration of the victims killed at Gashora, where 52 newly found bodies were laid to rest in dignity. We do have details.
What is now remembered as a walk of remembrance was in April 1994, a journey to death. The route from former Eto Chichuchiro, now IPRC Kigali, to Nyanza is where thousands of Tutsi who had sought. Survivors in Gashora recall the nights of April 9th and 10th in 1994 as among the most horrific. They say Interahamwe militia attacked from all directions, targeting the Tutsi who had sought refuge in the area, leaving many with little hope of survival.
In
1994, the killers lied to many Tutsi that if they seek shelter at Commune Gashora, they would survive, and also put in place means to flee, including vehicles to transport people in big numbers. On 10th, they came and killed many people that were already in that place as advised. But on 11th, it was even more disastrous. They had killed almost everyone there and started dragging their bodies down into a pit. For families of victims whose bodies were recently recovered, the pain of not being able to give their loved ones a dignified burial for over 3 decades has been deeply felt. These are our families. We therefore thank God and thank those who participated in locating their bodies. I am so happy. For 32 years now, we have been searching for our relatives and had failed to find them until today. This is a precious moment for me. I had been traumatized and was in and out of hospitals quite often with constant headaches. Despite this, survivors expressed appreciation for the government's continued support, saying it has helped them avoid being defined by their past and instead focus on rebuilding their lives. We lived a different life. Schooling was hard. It was equally difficult to share opinions on matters or do anything else like everyone was doing. We are grateful because all this changed, and it is something that we attribute to our good leadership. We cannot fail to celebrate the fact that the new Bugesera airport is in our district. We also have a good road network that connects different routes. All these infrastructures are a source of employment to many of us, especially those that come from this district. Member of Parliament, Honorable Speciosa Mukandanga, urged participants to reject genocide ideology and instead make use of the opportunities provided to them to build a better future. The youth of today have a responsibility to stand and fight against people who intend to deny and downplay the genocide against the Tutsi, because their aim is to take us back to our dark past, but all this will not be possible. A total of 52 bodies recovered from Gashora neighboring Ririma sector were given a dignified burial during the commemoration. They joined more than 5,000 victims already laid to rest at Gashora Genocide Memorial.
Now, as we remember and honor the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, one cannot ignore the failure of the international community to prevent this tragedy. Adam Squizera prepared a future story and examined the matter. Adam Squizera.
Flags are flown at the half-mast across Rwanda. Commemorative activities are taking place nationwide from April to July. The entire nation mourns the victims of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. The tragedy claimed over 1 million lives in just 100 days. This was the fastest genocide in the world history.
Also gave a warning to people that we were aware that these frictions could lead to something catastrophic, but nobody really believed it. My assessments were, and that's in the report I wrote and what the actions I wanted to take, the assessments from the political side of the mission had a different perspective. They thought I was overreacting. New York was busy with Yugoslavia and so on, so there was not a sufficient assessment of the reality that we had on the ground, no matter how many times I wrote them and called and discussed and so on.
The world's response was tragically inadequate. The international community's failure to intervene or even to prevent the genocide laid bare in shortcomings. The promise of never again was left unfulfilled.
In January 1994, the command of United Nations mission in Rwanda sent a fax back to headquarters in New York with detailed intelligence that in Interahamwe were stockpiling weapons and compiling lists of Tutsis to be killed. He was then ordered to share the information with the very government which was preparing the genocide and to take no further action. The technology existed to disrupt the radio broadcasts that directed the killings. The planes capable of jamming those signals were available. Officials even calculated the hourly cost of the mission. In the end, the operation was deemed to be too expensive and potentially also a violation of Rwanda's sovereignty. So the cost was more it became too expensive. It was more expensive, especially when in their minds, those lives are really worthless.
The failure of the international community was starkly evident at the former Eto Kicukiro, now IPRC Kigali. Thousands of Tutsi have sought shelter there, trusting that peacekeepers would protect them, only to be abandoned.
At Eto Kicukiro, when the peacekeepers withdrew, thousands of desperate Tutsi were left to die. Such scenes were repeated across the country. If these forces had instead been supported to protect Rwandans, the killers could have been deterred and many people would still be alive. The lives saved by the United Nations peacekeepers who were allowed to remain makes clear how much more could have been done with the political will. Even as the killings accelerated, the language used to describe what was happening itself became a matter of calculation.
Maniraho Ernest was among thousands of Tutsi who sought refuge at Eto Kicukiro. For him, the journey of suffering began a 15-minute walk from Kagarama, where his family lived, to St. Joseph Parish, just before reaching Eto Kicukiro.
Ababyeyi baraganiriye hanyuma baza gufata icyemezo yuko tugomba guhungira hano kuri paruwasi ya Kicukiro.
Parents held discussions and decided that we should seek refuge here at Kicukiro Parish at the time. However, not all of us left home together. Some went to Center Christus in Remera, while others came here. When we arrived, we found this hall already full, packed with people from different places. That's when they took us to a room at the back of this hall where we stayed.
Batujyanye mu kumba k'inyuma kari ko muri no sare abariho tuba.
Maniraho Ernest and family members thought Eto Kicukiro was a symbol of life, the area hosting United Nations peacekeeping troops. The mission was known as United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda, UNAMIR.
Umuhanda twanyuze ni inzira twaciyemo turimo kuza hano muri Eto nyirizina. Hari akarembo gatoya kari hepfo ariko twinjiriyemo kugira ngo tugere hano.
The road we used was the path through which we entered Eto Kicukiro. There was a small gate down there where we came in. To reach this road, we had to climb up where I am standing now, and this is where the main gates to the compound were located. There was a checkpoint manned by UNAMIL soldiers, and at first, they refused us in. When they turned us away, we went back and stayed on the football pitch. People kept pleading with them to allow us in, and later in the afternoon, they finally agreed, but first they checked us, and after that, they let us in.
Ubona mu masaha y'igicamunsi nibwo batwemereye turaza tugeze hano mu marembo baradusaka, minwari iradusaka, imaze kudusaka iratureka turinjira. Ahangaha mpagaze neza niho ayo marembo yarari. Twarinjiye tumaze kuhagera dusanga no mashuri ayangaya mureba hano.
We found school buildings overcrowded with people. That's where we stayed, while UNAMIL personnel were positioned over there. Many people had come from other areas like Kabeza, Niboy and Gatenga. In the following days, more people kept arriving, including some who had been injured, among them my cousin. They took him to receive first aid at a small clinic over there.
Ndibuka ko hari na mukuru wanjye wo kwa mama wacu wari utuye mu Gatenga, yinjiyemo hano bamaze kumutema. Icyo gihe bahise bamufata bajya kumuha ubuvuzi bw'ibanze. Hariya ndumva kuri rino shuri harimo ahantu binjiriramo hagati, hari harimo akavuriro.
For those who are taking refuge at the Kicukiro, April 11th remains an indelible memory. It was a day that starkly demonstrated how human lives were treated as less valuable than animals. On that day, Belgian Union peacekeepers troops evacuated with their dogs in vehicles, leaving the refugees behind in the hands of Interahamwe militias. Hudari Marie Rose, who was 20 years at that time, the image of that moment has stayed with her for years and will never fade from her memory.
Mu gitondo cy'itariki 11 niho nshaka kugera, itariki yatubabaje, itariki mbese twaburiyeho, isi yatuhindukanye, twese tuhinduka nk'ibishushungwe.
On the morning of the 11th, the day that deeply traumatized us, when it felt like the world had turned against us, we were all in shock when we learned that Minuar was going to leave us. We all started screaming. They had already packed up their belongings, while the Interahamwe had surrounded the entire compound and had begun firing into the air.
Tugenda tugwira tuba benshi, baravuga ngo yewe ngo Minuar igiye kudusiga. Twese twavugije induru tuti Minuar igiye kudusiga, tuti bati bagiye kugenda, bati bamaze no gufunga ibintu byabo, bati turagowe, bati ubwo dutabaze mu ijuru, bati Uwiteka aze kutwagira, bati kubera ko naho Interahamwe zari inyuma y'iki kiko zinjiyemo baratangira barasa mu kirere. Noneho
at the same time, the Minuar soldiers were loading their equipment and even their dogs into military trucks. We all cried out in fear. Parents began to weep. I was 20 years old at the time, crying and asking my mother, "What are we going to do now?" The mothers were crying too. It was complete chaos and despair.
turabigenza dute? Mama ati bane banje muragira ngo mbasubize iki? Ati se ati muragira ngo tujye hehe? Ati se n'aba mama batangira kurira, ibintu birivanga.
Victims of the Kicukiro massacre are laid to rest at the Nyanza Genocide Memorial. Every April 11th, the nation gathers here to remember and reflect.
Dufite umutekano, ugenda isaha yariyo yose ushakiye, amasaha yariyo yose.
Today, we have security at any time and can go wherever we want, which was not possible back then. I am grateful to the government for providing us with that security. They paid for our education, helped us study, and continue to support our daily lives. The Inhotanyi are alive, and we are still grateful to them, because without them, we would not be alive today. They were helped by God so that we could survive. God enabled them, and through that, we live.
Kandi Inkotanyi turacyakomeza kuzishimira, kuko iyo zitabaho ntabwo twari kuba tukiriho ubu ngubu. Zafashijwe n'Imana kugira ngo tubeho, Imana irazishoboza natwe tubaho.
Yet many perpetrators still walk free, finding refuge in countries that claim to uphold human rights and justice. Survivors continue to seek accountability. The continued inability to dismantle the FDLR, a group rooted in genocide ideology, serves as a stark reminder on the ongoing challenges. It reflects the harsh reality that the world still has much to learn from past failures in addressing such threats and ensuring lasting peace. This underscores the urgent need to stand up against hate speech and extremism, fostering a collective commitment to prevent history from repeating itself.
Should understand that the danger of moral passivity in the face of hatred and violent extremism. We should understand that danger, especially in the face of hatred and violent extremism. Africans, more than most, we must be reminded by all this history. Today, our continent accounts for the majority of the world's active conflicts. In 1994, Africa's collective institutions also failed to respond. I say this because the call for African sovereignty, legitimate and necessary as it is, must also mean that African institutions act decisively when Africans are at risk. Bad actors must not be allowed to hide behind the principle of sovereignty, to evade responsibility for abuses or deny citizens their rights. We cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. Genocide ideology is still spreading in our region. Left unchecked, it has the power to take us all backwards again.
The commemorative activities at Nyanza on April 11th each year serve as a powerful call to action. They remind the international community that the pledge to never again must be translated into concrete, meaningful action. It is a solemn reminder that the world must unite in the face of evil to prevent history from repeating itself.
Ntibizongera ukundi.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again. Plus jamais.
Nunca mais.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Kamwe tena.
Twibuke, twiyubaka.
From me and the rest of the team, have a good night and goodbye.